In the heart of a forgotten forest, where sunlight dappled through the leaves of ancient trees, Sarah Matthews stood before a weathered cabin, her 3 children huddled close. 2 weeks ago, she had been a respected office manager. Today, she was jobless, homeless, and desperate. The cabin, its windows filmed with decades of dust, seemed to beckon, a silent answer to her prayers. Inside, cobwebs draped from the ceiling beams and the floorboards groaned under her cautious steps. But it was the old trunk in the corner, half hidden beneath a tattered blanket, that caught her eye. What secrets did this abandoned shelter hold? And could they change the course of a family on the verge of collapse? 2 weeks earlier, Sarah Matthews had sat stunned in her office chair, the termination letter trembling in her hands. 12 years of dedication, erased by corporate restructuring and a 2-minute conversation. "I'm sorry, Sarah." The decision came from headquarters. Her supervisor avoided her gaze. "You'll get 2 weeks severance." That night, Sarah stared at her apartment ceiling, running the numbers while her children slept. The severance would barely cover the next month's rent. There were no savings, not after paying for Emma's braces and Liam's asthma treatments the year before. The job market for office managers had dried up in their small town, flooded with similar corporate casualties. Emma found her mother at the kitchen table the next morning, surrounded by job listings and rejection emails. "We'll be okay, Mom," Emma said, her 16 years carrying a maturity far beyond her age. She squeezed Sarah's hand before making breakfast for her siblings. 12-year-old Liam bounded into the kitchen, his energy a stark contrast to the family's circumstances. "Can I use the cardboard from the recycling for my school project?" "Of course, sweetie." 8-year-old Zoe appeared last, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. "Did you find a new job yet?" Her voice was small, sensing the tension. "Not yet, honey. But I will." 2 weeks passed in a blur of rejections. The eviction notice appeared the day after her severance ran out. 3 days to vacate. Sarah sold what she could: furniture, electronics, clothes. She kept only what fit into their old sedan: clothes, important documents, and a few precious keepsakes. Emma silently packed a small bag, her face a mask, her eyes red-rimmed. Liam treated it as an adventure, while Zoe cried as they left her bed behind. "Where are we going?" Emma asked as they pulled away from the apartment building. Sarah gripped the steering wheel. "My grandmother owned a small plot of land in the country, near Pine Haven. It's probably nothing now, but the area has campgrounds. We can stay there while I figure things out." The countryside grew more remote as they drove, the cell signal fading to nothing. Just as the car began to sputter and choke on a rural backroad, Sarah managed to coast onto a dirt track before the engine died completely. "Just in time," she muttered, popping the hood. She knew nothing about mechanics, and the nearest town was miles away. "Mom, there's a path," Liam said, pointing to a narrow trail disappearing into the woods. "Maybe it leads to a house where we can ask for help," Emma suggested. With no better options, Sarah agreed. "Stay together. Zoe, hold Liam's hand." The path wound through dense trees for nearly a mile before opening into a small clearing. There, half swallowed by overgrown vegetation, stood the cabin. Its windows were clouded with grime, and the wooden steps sagged beneath a small porch. The roof, however, looked sound, with no obvious holes or damage. "Mom, we can't just break in," Emma whispered as Sarah tried the doorknob. "We're not breaking in. We're seeking emergency shelter," Sarah replied as the door creaked open with a haunting groan. We'll find the owner tomorrow and explain. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light piercing the dirty windows. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, opposite a small kitchen with an old wood-burning stove. A wooden table with 3 chairs sat in the center. A narrow ladder led to what Sarah assumed was a sleeping loft. "It's like a fairy tale house," Zoe whispered. "It's probably full of spiders," Liam said, his eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. Sarah ran a finger along a dusty mantel. "It hasn't been lived in for years, but the structure seems solid." They spent the remaining daylight clearing cobwebs and sweeping decades of dust from the wooden floors. Sarah found old quilts in a cedar chest that, after a vigorous shaking outside, would serve as bedding. As night fell, the family huddled together on the floor before the cold hearth, using their coats as pillows. The children fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the day's events. Sarah lay awake, watching the shadows dance across their faces in the light of her single flashlight. She had kept her fears in check for their sake, but alone with her thoughts, the gravity of her situation washed over her. Unemployed, homeless, with 3 children depending on her. The flickering light caught something in the corner of the room, the edge of the old trunk, still half hidden. Too tired to investigate, Sarah resolved to look at it in the morning. For now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet tears before clicking off the light and joining her children in a restless sleep. Morning light filtered through the grimy windows, illuminating the dancing dust. Sarah woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings until the previous day's events rushed back. The children were still asleep, huddled together on the wooden floor. The trunk in the corner called to her. Sarah carefully untangled herself from Zoe's arms and crossed the room, kneeling beside the mysterious container. It was old but well crafted, with leather straps reinforcing the corners and a brass lock securing its contents. She tried the lid. It was locked, as she'd expected. "What do you think is inside?" Liam's voice made her jump. He stood behind her, his hair tousled from sleep. "I don't know, but it's not for us to open." "Maybe there's a key somewhere," he suggested, his eyes glinting with adventure. Sarah ruffled his hair. "Let's focus on making this place livable first." Once Emma and Zoe were awake, the family set their priorities: find water, find food, and assess their temporary shelter. To Sarah's relief, a hand pump well behind the cabin was still functional after some priming. The water, after an initial rusty flow, ran clear and cold. Inside, they continued to clean. Emma tackled the small kitchen area while Liam explored the loft. Zoe stayed close to Sarah, helping sweep the floor. "Mom, look!" Zoe pointed to a glint in the debris near the fireplace. Sarah knelt and found a small, ornate key, half buried in ash and dust. "It's beautiful." Sarah examined the tarnished brass key, its head decorated with an intricate leaf pattern. "Maybe it opens the trunk," Liam exclaimed, scrambling down the loft ladder. Sarah hesitated. "This isn't our property, Liam. We shouldn't be prying." "But no one's been here in ages," Emma joined in, wiping dust from her hands. "And we need to know more about this place if we're going to stay here." Sarah considered their situation. They needed this shelter, and understanding more about the cabin might help them locate its owner. Reluctantly, she approached the trunk and slid the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease. The lid creaked open, revealing a neatly organized interior protected by a layer of oilcloth. Sarah carefully removed the items: leather-bound journals, yellowed maps, and a folded document that looked like a property deed. "Whoa," Liam breathed. peering over her shoulder. Sarah opened the top journal, finding elegant script on the first page. Property of Eleanor Whitman, 1952. She turned to the first entry. April 12, 1952. The cabin is more dilapidated than I remembered from my girlhood visits, but these walls are my own. After 15 years in a marriage that slowly erased me, I have finally found the courage to leave. James will be furious when he discovers I've fled to my grandfather's old hunting cabin. But he always considered this land worthless, too remote, too wild. Its very worthlessness is my salvation. She lived here alone? Emma asked, reading over Sarah's shoulder. Sounds like she was running from something too, Sarah murmured. She set the journal aside and examined the deed. The faded document appeared to grant ownership of not just the cabin, but a significant tract of the surrounding land to Eleanor's grandfather, Alexander Whitman. Are there still Whitmans in town? Emma asked. I don't know, we'll have to find out, Sarah said, carefully folding the deed. Liam had opened another journal. Listen to this, he read. I have hidden my treasure where only those who are worthy will find it. May the forest keep my secrets until they are needed. Treasure? Zoe's eyes grew wide with visions of gold and jewels. It's probably just sentimental items. Sarah tempered their expectations, fighting her own rising curiosity. Emma remained skeptical. We should put everything back. This is private. I don't think Eleanor would mind, Zoe said softly. As they all turned to her, she shrugged. She seems nice? She seems nice, Sarah repeated. I can feel her here. She's happy we found her special key. Sarah and Emma exchanged a worried glance, but Liam nodded enthusiastically. It does feel different in here since we opened the trunk. Warmer. Sarah touched Zoe's forehead, checking for a fever. It was cool. You have a big imagination, sweetie. It's not imagination, Zoe insisted quietly. As evening approached, Sarah made a meager dinner from their dwindling supplies. Tomorrow, they would have to hike to town for food and information. With the children finally asleep in the loft, Liam and Zoe thrilled with the adventure, Emma still uneasy about their intrusion. Sarah returned to Eleanor's journals. By candlelight, she began to read from the beginning, drawn into the life of a woman who, 70 years earlier, had also sought refuge within these same walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the ancient trees, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace, as if the cabin itself were welcoming them home. The cabin fell silent, save for the occasional creak of settling wood. Sarah drew Eleanor's journal closer to the flickering candlelight. May 3rd, 1952. The first weeks have been harder than I imagined. My hands, soft from years as a banker's wife, are now calloused and cracked. I have learned to chop wood, to haul water, to patch the many gaps in this cabin. James always said I was too delicate for real work. How satisfying it is to prove him wrong, with no one but the birds and the owls to witness. Sarah flexed her own hands, soft from office work. She would need that same grit. June 15th, 1952. I ventured into Pine Haven today. The stairs followed me everywhere. A woman alone is a suspicion, but a woman who has left her husband is practically a criminal. The general store owner, Mr. Porter, was kind enough, though his wife whispered behind my back. I bought only the essentials: flour, salt, coffee. The shoots in my garden show promise. The fishing lessons my grandfather gave me as a girl have proven invaluable. Sarah read on, becoming more engrossed in Eleanor's life. The parallels between their situations were striking. Both women, suddenly on their own, facing an uncertain future. But Eleanor had chosen this isolation, while Sarah's had been forced upon her. August 28th, 1952. James finally found me. He arrived in his polished automobile, looking so out of place amongst these woods. He demanded I come to my senses and return home. When I refused, he grew vicious, threatening. He said he would have me declared mentally unfit, have me committed. I held my ground. This cabin has given me a strength I never knew I possessed. When he finally left, I reinforced the doors and windows. This sanctuary must remain safe. Sarah instinctively glanced at the door. The isolation that had felt so threatening now felt protective. December 12th, 1952. Winter has wrapped the cabin in silence and snow. I have stored enough food and firewood to last until the spring. The townspeople have gradually accepted my presence, though I remain the strange Whitman woman. Little do they know what I have uncovered in my grandfather's old papers. The true ownership of the land in this valley has been manipulated and stolen. The Blackwood fortune was a house of cards, built on a foundation of forgeries and fraud. This proof is my insurance, and perhaps my purpose. Sarah straightened, suddenly alert. Land disputes. That could explain why the cabin had been abandoned. She flipped through several more entries. April 30th, 1953. 1 year into my sanctuary, I have begun to create a series of clues and hiding places for my documentation. If something should happen to me, the truth must survive. I cannot trust the local authorities. Too many are in Blackwood's pocket. But one day, someone will need this proof. Someone who needs this cabin as desperately as I once did. The diary entries went on, documenting Eleanor's transformation from a high society wife into a self-reliant frontierswoman. She had learned to hunt, to preserve food, even to build simple furniture. Her isolation had become independence. Sarah closed the journal, her mind racing. Had Eleanor created some kind of scavenger hunt? And what exactly was this proof she kept mentioning? A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps on the porch. Sarah quickly blew out the candle and crept to the window, peering through a grimy sliver of glass. A man in hiking gear stood on the porch, the beam of his headlamp sweeping across the cabin's exterior. He didn't look threatening, just surprised by the signs of life. Cautiously, Sarah opened the door. "Oh!" The hiker jumped. "Sorry to bother you. I didn't realize anyone lived out here." "We're just staying temporarily," Sarah explained, keeping her voice low so as not to wake the children. "Our car broke down nearby." The man nodded, though he still looked uncertain. "I've been hiking these woods for years. Never seen anyone at the old Whitman place. Folks say it's haunted." "Haunted?" "Eleanor Whitman disappeared from here back in the 50s. Some say she still roams these woods." He gave an apologetic shrug. "Just a local legend. Do you need any help? I can call for a tow truck when I get back to town." "That would be very kind. Thank you." Sarah gave him the details about their car. After the hiker was gone, Sarah couldn't get back to sleep. She examined the cabin with new eyes, searching for anything that might be a clue to Eleanor's mystery. The structure itself was surprisingly sound for its age. The roof didn't leak, despite years of neglect. The stone fireplace was masterfully built. Even the well pump still worked perfectly. Eleanor, or someone, had built this place to last. Sarah ran her hand along the fireplace mantel, her fingers catching on small indentations. Looking closer, she found a pattern of tiny carved leaves that matched the design on the key. They weren't random decorations. They were deliberate marks. Whatever Eleanor had hidden, she had intended for the right person to find it. And somehow, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she might be that person. The next morning, Sarah unfolded a faded map she'd found tucked in the back of Eleanor's journal. Yellowed with age, it showed Pine Haven and the surrounding wilderness, with several locations marked by small stars. One star, the cabin, was circled. The others remained a mystery. "We need supplies," Sarah announced after the children finished their meager breakfast. "I'm going into town." "I'm coming with you," Emma insisted, crossing her arms. "I'm 16, not 6, and you don't know anything about this place." Emma's posture made it clear this was not negotiable. Sarah relented. "All right, Liam, you're in charge. Lock the door, don't wander off, and don't talk to strangers." Liam finished with a dramatic eye roll. "We'll be fine, Mom." Zoe looked apprehensive. "What if the cabin lady comes back while you're gone?" "Eleanor?" Sarah knelt beside her daughter. "Honey, Eleanor lived here a very long time ago." "But I heard her last night," Zoe whispered. "She was humming in the kitchen." Emma and Sarah exchanged a worried glance. "Your imagination is just working overtime," Sarah said gently. "We'll be back before lunch." The walk to Pine Haven took nearly 40 minutes. The town emerged from the morning mist like a postcard from the past. A single main street lined with brick buildings, American flags hanging from lampposts, and a town square dominated by a white gazebo. "It's like we walked back in time," Emma murmured. People noticed them immediately, with the sharp awareness small towns have for outsiders. Some offered polite nods, others stared openly. Sarah clutched the purse containing their last remaining cash and walked toward a store with Porter's General Merchandise painted on the window. A bell chimed as they entered. An elderly woman looked up from the counter. "Morning. Don't believe I've seen you two before." "We're just passing through," Sarah replied. "Our car broke down yesterday." "And where are you folks staying?" The woman's tone was conversational but probing. Sarah hesitated. "We found shelter in an old cabin in the woods." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "The Whitman place. Nobody's lived there in decades." "We realize it was just an emergency shelter," Sarah added quickly. "I'm Mabel Porter," the woman said, extending a hand. "My father ran this store back when Eleanor Whitman was alive. She used to come in here." "Sarah Matthews. This is my daughter, Emma." Mabel nodded thoughtfully. "Strange coincidence. You remind me a bit of her. Determined. Had an independent air about her. Not many women came up to these parts alone back then. Not now either, for that matter." The bell chimed again, as a man in a sheriff's uniform walked in. "Morning, Mabel." "Sheriff Miller. This is Sarah and Emma Matthews. Their car broke down and they've been staying at the old Whitman cabin." The sheriff's friendly expression shifted to one of concern. "That property isn't safe for habitation, ma'am." "We're fine," Sarah replied. "We'll be on our way as soon as our car is fixed." "That might be a problem," the sheriff said, removing his hat. "A hiker reported your situation. I checked on your vehicle this morning. The engine's shot. You're going to need parts ordered in." "How long?" Sarah asked, her stomach sinking. "Could be a couple of days. Simmons' garage is backed up." "You can't stay in that cabin," the sheriff continued. "It's not up to code. And technically, you're trespassing." "We don't have money for a motel," Sarah admitted. The conversation halted as the shop door opened again. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. Harrison, Mabel greeted him coolly. Mabel, the man nodded, before turning his inquisitive eyes on Sarah. New faces in town. The, this is Harrison Blackwood, the sheriff explained. He owns Blackwood Timber and most of the land around here. These folks had some trouble, took shelter in the old Whitman cabin. Blackwood's expression hardened. That is my property. Your property? Sarah asked before she could stop herself. The Whitman property was absorbed into my holdings years ago. Tax auction. Something in his tone, a dismissive arrogance, sparked a rebellious streak in Sarah. The cabin is in surprisingly good condition, considering. Regardless, it is not available for squatters. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Sheriff, I trust you'll ensure these people find suitable accommodations elsewhere. After Blackwood left, Mabel shook her head. Don't you mind him. The Blackwoods have run this town for generations, and Harrison thinks that makes him royalty. We really don't have anywhere else to go, Sarah admitted quietly. Mabel studied her for a long moment. I'll tell you what. I could use some help around the store. My last assistant went off to college. The job comes with the apartment upstairs. It's small, but it's clean. Really? Sarah could hardly believe their luck. Part-time to start. Your daughter can help out too when she's not in school. I don't know how to thank you. Don't have to. I always had a soft spot for the Whitmans. Mabel's eyes held a mysterious twinkle. You'd best go get your things before Harrison sends someone out to check. As they left the store with their groceries and an unexpected lifeline, Sheriff Miller followed them out. A word of free advice, he said quietly. Whatever you do, get your paperwork in order. Blackwood doesn't let things go, especially land. Sarah nodded, her mind flashing to Eleanor's journals and the property deed hidden in the trunk. Perhaps there was more to this than simple trespassing. The county records office occupied a corner of Pine Haven's modest town hall. It was a single room with filing cabinets lining the walls and the perpetual scent of old paper. Sarah had left the children with Mabel, who was showing them the small apartment above the store that would be their temporary home. Can I help you? A clerk in thick glasses looked up from a computer that seemed oddly modern in the vintage setting. I'm researching property records, Sarah explained, for a cabin on the old Whitman land. The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly. The Whitman property. That's been in legal limbo for decades. Legal limbo? Eleanor Whitman disappeared in 1957. Never found. No will was ever probated. The property went to a tax auction in the 80s, but there were complications. What kind of complications? The clerk glanced around. Missing paperwork, boundary disputes. The county supervisor at the time, a Blackwood associate, pushed the sale through anyway. Then environmental protections were established for part of the land, complicating things further. So who legally owns the cabin now? Sarah asked. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The clerk adjusted his glasses. The Blackwood Timber Corporation lays claim to most of the Whitman tract, but the cabin itself sits in a gray area near the protected watershed boundary. It's not technically buildable land anymore, so if someone were living there, they'd be trespassing according to Blackwood, but the county never formally transferred the deed to that specific parcel. He gave her a curious look. Why the interest? Before Sarah could form a reply, a young man in a rumpled suit hurried in. Thomas, perfect timing. The clerk waved him over. This lady has questions about the Whitman property. Really? The young man's interest was visibly piqued. Thomas Reed. I clerk for Judge Anderson, but my focus is real estate law. Sarah Matthews. My children and I. We came across the old cabin recently. Thomas's eyes lit up. The Whitman case is fascinating, from a legal standpoint. One of the few properties Blackwood hasn't been able to fully secure, despite decades of trying. I found what appears to be an original deed in the cabin, Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. Thomas and the clerk exchanged a significant glance. You've been inside? Thomas asked. Sarah nodded. And you found documents? In an old trunk? A property deed from 1897? Journals from the 1950s? Thomas glanced around before lowering his voice. This could be significant. The missing Whitman paperwork has been a local legal mystery for years. Significant how? Sarah asked. Have you ever heard of adverse possession? When Sarah shook her head, he continued. It's a legal doctrine that allows someone to claim ownership of a property if they openly occupy and improve it for a set period. How long is that period in this state? Sarah asked. 7 years with color of title, which means you have some documentation that suggests ownership, even if it's not conclusive. Without any documentation, it's 20 years. Sarah's mind raced. Eleanor's original deed could potentially constitute color of title for whoever possessed it now. Thomas looked at her meaningfully. Especially if combined with actual occupation and improvement of the property. Blackwood would fight it, the clerk interjected. He's been trying to consolidate that land for a commercial development project. The environmental protections complicate that, Thomas countered. And unresolved questions about the validity of the original auction would make any court case interesting. He handed Sarah his card. If you're serious about this, I'd like to see those documents. Later, as Sarah walked back to Mabel's store, she mulled over Thomas's parting words. Sometimes, properties find their rightful owners through unexpected means. Eleanor Whitman was known for playing the long game. The possibility of a legitimate claim to the cabin felt impossibly remote. And yet, Eleanor's journals suggested she had deliberately created a path for someone to follow. Someone like Sarah. Back at the store, she found her children helping Mabel restock the shelves. Even Emma, whose perpetual teenage skepticism had temporarily yielded to the novelty of small-town life, seemed intrigued. How was the records office? Mabel asked, offering Sarah a cup of coffee. Interesting. I met a lawyer named Thomas Reed. Tommy Reed. Good man. Sharp as a tack, but stubborn when it comes to justice. Mabel smiled. His grandfather was the only lawyer in town who wouldn't take a Blackwood as a client. He mentioned adverse possession laws, Sarah said. Mabel's eyes twinkled. Did he now? Sounds like you made quite an impression. That night, after settling the children in their small but clean apartment, Sarah spread Eleanor's papers across the kitchen table. The deed, the journals, the map with its mysterious star-like markings, all pieces of a puzzle Eleanor had left behind. A plan began to form in her mind. The cabin represented more than temporary shelter. It offered a potential beginning, a home they could legally claim as their own. The process would take time and perseverance, but Eleanor's journals had already taught her the value of both. Tomorrow, they would return to the cabin with Thomas Reed. Tonight, they had hope, a resource that had been in short supply since the eviction notice had arrived 2 weeks prior. The old wood-burning stove dominated the cabin's kitchen area, its cast-iron surface dull from decades of neglect. Thomas Reed crouched beside it, inspecting the flue. Structurally, it's in good shape, he declared. Just needs a thorough cleaning and a few minor repairs. Sarah nodded, taking mental notes. After showing Thomas Eleanor's documents and receiving his cautiously optimistic legal assessment, they had agreed on a strategy: occupy and improve the property while he researched its complicated legal history. If you're serious about pursuing adverse possession, Thomas explained, standing and wiping his hands, you need to establish permanent residency and make visible improvements. The fact that the cabin sits on a parcel with an undefined title actually works in your favor. Thomas's brow furrowed. Blackwood will likely challenge you, he said, but he doesn't have a clear title to this specific piece of land. The environmental disputes back in the 90s created a legal gray area he never bothered to resolve. After Thomas left, promising to handle the initial paperwork, the real work began. The family divided the chores. Emma, initially resistant, was put in charge of cleaning the interior. Liam enthusiastically took inventory of needed repairs. Zoe gathered kindling for the fireplace, and Sarah tackled the wood stove. "This is pointless," Emma muttered, vigorously scrubbing decades of grime from the window panes. "We're just going to fix this place up for some rich guy to kick us out." "Thomas thinks we have a case," Sarah countered, scraping rust from the stove's surface. "A lawyer who's probably never won a case against Blackwood." "Sometimes you have to take a risk, Emma, like I did with your father." The words hung between them, sharp and unexpected. Emma paused her scrubbing. "Dad left us. This is different, isn't it? We had stability before. Now we're squatting in some haunted cabin, betting everything on a stack of old paperwork." Before Sarah could respond, Liam burst through the door. "Mom, I found something cool." He dragged them outside to the overgrown garden, where he had uncovered the remnants of a rainwater collection system. Eleanor mentions this in her journal, Sarah realized. She had designed it herself. Even Emma looked impressed. Clever woman. The days settled into a rhythm of renewal and discovery. They cleared debris, patched the roof, and reclaimed the garden from the wilderness. Sarah worked mornings at Mabel's store and spent her afternoons at the cabin. The stove became her personal project, dismantling, wire brushing, and resealing its components until it gleamed with renewed purpose. After a week of effort, Emma discovered a hidden compartment behind a loose baseboard. "Mom," she called out, "there's something in here." The family gathered as she extracted a small leather pouch containing hand-drawn blueprints of the cabin, annotated in Eleanor's distinctive script. "Look!" Liam pointed to markings on the kitchen wall. "Secret passages." "Not passages," Sarah corrected, studying the blueprints. "Hidden storage." Following Eleanor's designs, they located 5 concealed compartments throughout the cabin. 2 were empty. One held preserved seeds labeled in Eleanor's hand. Another contained tools, and the last, a small metal box, hid photographs of the cabin and the surrounding grounds from long ago. "She really did think of everything," Sarah murmured, carefully examining the photos that documented the property's original state. "Valuable evidence for our adverse possession claim," she said to Zoe, who was quieter than usual. "She's happy we're fixing her house." "Eleanor?" Sarah asked gently. Zoe nodded. "She shows me where things are supposed to go." Instead of dismissing her daughter's imagination, Sarah asked, "What else does she tell you?" "That we belong here. That she was waiting for us." Emma rolled her eyes, but Sarah noticed her daughter worked with more determination after that. The refurbished wood stove became the heart of the cabin. One evening, as it radiated warmth against the autumn chill, Sarah prepared their first real meal in their new home: vegetable soup and fresh bread, courtesy of Mabel's generosity with supplies from the store. "It's starting to feel like a home," Liam observed, helping set the mended table. A temporary home, Emma corrected, though with less conviction than before. To our home for now, Sarah toasted, ladling soup into mismatched bowls. After dinner, with the children asleep in the newly cleaned loft, Sarah continued reading Eleanor's journals by the stove's warm glow. One passage resonated deeply. A home is not given, it is made. Each repair, each improvement, each moment of care embeds your spirit within these walls. I was not born to this cabin, but I made it mine, through persistence and love. Perhaps one day, another will need this refuge as desperately as I did. To her, I leave not just a shelter, but a possibility. Outside, an expensive SUV drove slowly past the cabin, its headlights briefly sweeping the interior. Sarah recognized the silhouette of Harrison Blackwood at the wheel. Their improvements had not gone unnoticed. The real challenge was just beginning. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the clearing as Liam attacked the overgrown garden with gusto. 3 weeks had passed since they'd begun their renovations, and the cabin was slowly transforming from a derelict relic into a functioning home. "Mom!" Liam's excited voice came from behind the cabin. "I found something weird." Sarah set aside the window frame she was repainting and joined her son. He stood proudly beside a shallow hole, holding a smooth, palm-sized stone. "Look at the carvings," he said, wiping away the dirt to reveal intricate symbols etched into the stone's surface. Sarah took it carefully. The marks weren't random. They formed a deliberate pattern of curves and angles, almost like a primitive map. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Right here, about 6 inches down. I was digging to plant the raspberry bushes Mabel gave us." Sarah studied the stone, a memory surfacing. She had seen these symbols before, in one of Eleanor's journals. Back inside, she retrieved the journal and flipped through it until she found the entry from June 1954. "I have begun to implement my contingency plan. The first marker is set in the garden, where the wildflowers will disguise its presence. The symbols correspond to the map in grandfather's survey book. Instructions only the worthy will recognize. If something happens to me, the proof must survive." "What is it, Mom?" Emma asked, looking up from the schoolwork spread across the kitchen table. Despite her initial resistance, she had enrolled in the local high school, adapting to rural education with a surprising grace. "I think Liam found one of Eleanor's clues." "A clue to what?" "To her treasure," Sarah answered, showing Emma the journal entry. Zoe appeared from the loft, where she was arranging wildflowers in mason jars. "The lady said we would find it soon." Emma's expression toward her younger sister had softened, though she would never admit to believing in Zoe's cabin lady. She had simply stopped openly challenging the girl's claims. "Can we look for the next clue now?" Liam bounced with excitement. Sarah studied the markings on the stone more closely. They could be directions or coordinates of some kind. "Or a code," Emma suggested, an unexpected interest lighting up her features. She reached for the stone. "Can I see?" Sarah handed it to her, pleased by her daughter's engagement. Emma had grown increasingly invested in the cabin project, even if she maintained a facade of indifference. "These symbols," Emma said, tracing them with her finger. "They aren't random. There's a pattern here." They gathered around the kitchen table, spreading out Eleanor's journals, the property maps, and the carved stone. What began as Liam's discovery evolved into a family project, deciphering Eleanor's message. "Listen to this entry," Sarah read aloud from a later journal. The path begins where life is reborn each spring, follows where the water once ran, and rests where the shadows never fade. The garden is where life is reborn, Liam reasoned. And where the water once ran could be the old creek bed behind the cabin, Emma added. Excited by the puzzle, they compared the stone's markings to the property maps, finding subtle correspondences. One symbol matched a distinctive bend in the creek. Another resembled the peculiar rock formation near the eastern edge of the property. "It's a treasure hunt," Liam declared, his eyes shining with adventure. "It's like Eleanor made this just for us." "She probably made it for whoever found the cabin." Sarah tempered his enthusiasm. "But yes, it does seem she left a trail to something important." "The evidence she mentioned," Emma observed. "Against the Blackwoods." Sarah nodded. "She was documenting something. Thomas believes it could be the key to our legal case." As evening fell, they decided to follow the first set of directions the next day. Zoe placed the stone on the fireplace mantel, arranging her wildflowers around it like an altar. "The lady is happy we found her special stone," she whispered. Later, after the children were asleep, Sarah noticed headlights approaching through the trees. Sheriff Miller's patrol car pulled up beside the cabin. Her stomach tightened as she stepped outside to meet him. "Evening, Sarah," he said, tipping his hat. "Place is looking good. We've been working hard." "I can see that." He looked around with appreciation before his expression turned serious. "Wanted to give you a heads up. Blackwood filed a formal complaint, trespassing on his property. Thomas Reed says this parcel has a disputed title. It might, but Blackwood has influence with the county commissioners. Just be careful." Miller hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Eleanor Whitman didn't just disappear. There were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "That she had proof of wrongdoing involving the Blackwood family. Some folks said that's why she disappeared." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Probably just small-town talk." After Miller left, Sarah returned to Eleanor's journals with a new purpose, reading late into the night. An entry from Eleanor's last year sent a chill down her spine. "I have completed my contingency plan. The evidence is secure, hidden where only the worthy can find it. If something should happen to me, follow the markers. The truth will outlive us all." Outside the window, the familiar SUV passed slowly by the cabin, its driver nearly invisible in the darkness. Harrison Blackwood was watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. Or perhaps to find what Eleanor had hidden so many years ago. Mabel's general store was humming with mid-morning activity as Sarah restocked the canned goods section. A month into the job, she had already settled into the rhythm of small-town commerce. The regular customers, the predictable pre-noon rush, the gossip exchanged over shopping baskets. "Sarah," Mabel called from behind the counter. "Come meet someone." Sarah walked over to find Mabel with an elderly woman whose wrinkled hands were busy arranging a patchwork quilt across the countertop. "This is Irene Hawley," Mabel introduced. "Makes the best quilts in 3 counties and remembers everyone who's passed through Pine Haven since the Great Flood." Irene chuckled. "I'm not quite that old, Mabel." She extended a hand to Sarah. "I hear you're fixing up the old Whitman place. Brave undertaking." "It's coming along," Sarah replied, shaking the woman's hand. "We've found some interesting things." "I imagine you have. Eleanor was a resourceful one." Something in Irene's tone hinted at a deeper meaning. "You knew her?" Sarah asked. "Everyone knew of her. Few knew her." Irene smoothed the quilt with practiced hands. I was a young girl when she disappeared. Remember the search parties combing those woods for weeks? They never found her. Irene shook her head. Some said she just left, tired of fighting Blackwood Sr. over the land. Others suspected something more sinister. Either way, she vanished. Just gone. After Irene left, Mabel folded the quilt with care. Irene hosts a women's circle every Thursday night. You should go. Oh, I couldn't impose. Nonsense. I've been going for 30 years myself. It's good company, good conversation. Mabel winked. You might hear things about Pine Haven that you won't find in the official records. That afternoon, Emma stopped by the shop after school, a library book tucked under her arm. Saw some friends at the library, she announced, helping herself to an apple from the produce section. Mrs. Carlton is letting me use the historical archives for a school project. What project? Sarah asked, surprised by her daughter's initiative. Local history. Emma shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant. Figured researching the Whitman property might help our case. Sarah hid a smile, realizing Emma had fully joined their cause. How thoughtful of you. It's just practical, Emma insisted. Oh, and Liam and Zoe's teacher asked if they could join the autumn nature program. It's after school on Tuesdays. So they're settling in well? Emma nodded. Zoe's basically the class pet since she knows all those weird plants from Eleanor's journal, and Liam's making friends with his treasure hunting stories. That evening, Sarah witnessed this integration firsthand when she picked the younger children up from school. Zoe was surrounded by a cluster of classmates, showing them how to weave blades of grass into simple baskets, a skill she claimed to have learned from the lady in the cabin. Liam stood with two boys his age, gesturing animatedly toward the woods, no doubt elaborating on their treasure hunt. A woman in a cardigan approached. I'm Patricia Donahue, Liam and Zoe's teacher. Your children have brought such a wonderful energy to our class. They seem to be enjoying it. Liam's stories about restoring the cabin have inspired our local history unit. Would you ever consider hosting the class for a visit? So many of these children have heard stories about the Whitman place their whole lives song but have never seen it. The request took Sarah by surprise. We're still renovating. That's perfect. They can see preservation in action. It was hard to resist Mrs. Donahue's enthusiasm. It would mean so much to them. Sarah found herself agreeing to a class visit the following month. As she gathered the children to leave, she noticed Harrison Blackwood's luxury SUV parked across from the school, his imposing figure watching them from behind the tinted glass. On Thursday evening, with Emma looking after the younger kids, Sarah attended the women's circle. 8 women of various ages gathered in Irene's cozy living room, the promised quilt stretched ceremoniously on a frame in the center. Each woman adds a piece, Mabel explained, as Sarah admired the intricate community quilt. We've been working on it since spring. It's for the family who lost their home in the creek flood. The evening passed with easy conversation, local news, and gentle humor. Sarah felt a warmth she hadn't experienced since before the layoff, the simple pleasure of non-judgmental adult company. As the gathering wound down, Irene approached Sarah privately. I wanted you to have this, she said, pressing a small fabric pouch into Sarah's hand. I found it among my mother's things. I think it belongs to the cabin. Later, alone in Mabel's apartment, Sarah opened the pouch. Inside was a small, silver thimble engraved with delicate leaves, identical to the pattern on the key that had opened Eleanor's chest. She made friends here, Mabel remarked, seeing Sarah's discovery. Despite what some thought of her, Eleanor touched lives. left pieces of herself with those who showed her kindness. Sarah added the thimble to her growing collection of Eleanor's artifacts, feeling increasingly certain that the woman had created not just a treasure hunt, but a community network. Connections that had survived decades after her disappearance. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the rooftops of Pine Haven in a coat of white. In the soft silence, Sarah felt something she hadn't dared to acknowledge for weeks: the hesitant roots of belonging. The legal notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Sheriff Miller with an apologetic expression. Sarah stood on the cabin's newly repaired porch, reading the formal language with rising dread. "This can't be right," she said, looking up at Miller. "We've been here nearly 2 months." "Thomas is a good lawyer, but he's young," Miller said, removing his hat. "Blackwood's filed for an emergency eviction, citing unsafe habitation and trespassing. The hearing is set for next month, but this preliminary order gives you 30 days to vacate." 30 days? But winter's coming. Where would we go? "I'm sorry, Sarah. The court orders are binding until the hearing." He shifted uncomfortably. "Blackwood seemed mighty interested in how much work you've done, almost as if he was waiting for you to improve the property before he made his move." After Miller left, Sarah sank onto the porch steps, the eviction notice clutched in her hand. The family had poured everything into the cabin: their limited funds, their physical labor, their hopes for a new start. Now, it could all be taken away with the stroke of a judge's pen. When Thomas Reed arrived that evening, his usual confident demeanor was subdued. "Blackwood pulled strings with Judge Harmon," he explained, pacing the cabin's main room. "Claimed environmental protections in the watershed make your occupancy a potential contamination risk." "That's ridiculous," Sarah protested. "We've been meticulous about waste management and water conservation." "It's a legal tactic, not a genuine concern." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "He's also contesting the validity of Eleanor's deed, claiming that subsequent tax sales supersede it." "Can he do that?" "He's trying. I've filed counter motions, but, Sarah, I have to warn you, Blackwood doesn't lose cases locally. His family's influence runs deep." The children reacted to the news in different ways. Liam immediately suggested hiding in the woods, just as Eleanor might have. Zoe grew quiet, whispering to empty corners of the cabin, as if consulting an unseen advisor. It was Emma's response that surprised Sarah most. "We can't give up," her daughter insisted, a steel in her eyes that Sarah had never seen before. "This is our home now. We earned it." That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah spread Eleanor's papers across the kitchen table. There had to be something they were missing. Some legal protection Eleanor had put in place before she vanished. A knock at the door startled her. It was Thomas Reed, looking grim. "Sorry for the late hour," he apologized, "but I found something you need to see." He placed a folder on the table and opened it to reveal photocopies of court records. Eleanor Whitman had filed 3 separate lawsuits against Blackwood Timber between 1954 and 1956. Each case alleged fraudulent land acquisition practices, but all were dismissed for lack of evidence. He tapped the documents. "The interesting part is what happened after each dismissal. Eleanor would disappear for weeks, then return with new documents. She was gathering evidence," Sarah concluded, "building her case methodically, until she disappeared for good in 1957. Thomas nodded gravely. "The timing suggests she either found conclusive proof or was stopped from presenting it." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Either way, I believe whatever she found is what you're meant to find with her clues. Thomas gathered the papers, but we're running out of time. The next morning, Emma burst into Mabel's shop where Sarah was working. Mom, we have to find the treasure, now! She thrust a library book in front of Sarah. I found an article about Eleanor. The day before she disappeared, she told the shopkeeper, Mabel's father, that she'd finally uncovered the truth, and that only the worthy could find it. Sarah looked at Mabel, who nodded in confirmation. Dad always believed something happened to her, Mabel said quietly. She was too determined to just walk away. That night, the family gathered around the kitchen table for a war council. Emma had created a detailed map, combining the clues from Eleanor's journal with the symbols from the stone. Liam reported that his scouting of the creek bed had revealed markings on certain trees that matched patterns in Eleanor's journal. We need to focus on finding the second major clue, Sarah decided. The stone led us to the creek, and Eleanor's journal mentioned where the shadows never fade. The old well, Zoe said suddenly, looking up from her drawing. That's what she told me to tell you. Eleanor told you about the well? Sarah asked gently. Zoe nodded solemnly. She says it's important to hurry. The bad man is getting closer. Sarah exchanged a look with Emma, whose skepticism had given way to practical urgency. The well is on the north side of the property, Emma confirmed. We haven't fully explored it yet. Then that's our next move, Sarah resolved, folding the eviction notice and placing it in a drawer. Whatever Eleanor hid, we need to find it before we're forced to leave. Outside, the wind carried the sound of an idling engine before it faded into the distance. Someone was watching the cabin. The race against time had begun. The dawn mist clung to the ground as the family gathered around the old well. Built of fitted fieldstone and covered with a weathered wooden lid, it sat at the edge of the clearing behind the cabin. Sarah had brought ropes, flashlights, and Thomas Reed, who had arrived early to help with the exploration. Are you sure about this? Thomas asked, eyeing the well's structure. These old wells can be dangerous. I'm sure, Sarah replied, watching as Zoe ran her small hands over the stones, searching for something only she found to see. Here, Zoe announced, pointing to a stone with a nearly invisible leaf pattern etched into its surface. Eleanor's mark! Thomas helped Sarah pry off the heavy lid. Flashlight beams cut into the darkness, revealing water about 30 feet below. The stone walls disappeared into the murky depths. I don't see anything unusual, Emma remarked, peering over the edge. There's a ledge, Liam pointed out, aiming his own flashlight. About halfway down. See how the stones jut out there? He was right. About 15 feet down, the circumference of the well widened slightly, creating a narrow shelf around its perimeter. Could be a natural formation, Thomas suggested. Or a deliberate design, Sarah added. For well maintenance, or for hiding something. The question is how to get down there safely. After careful consideration, they devised a plan. Liam, the lightest and most agile, would be lowered on a rope harness, with Thomas and Sarah securing him from above. Emma would be in charge of the flashlights and communication. I want to help too, Zoe insisted. You already did, Sarah assured her. You found Eleanor's mark. As they geared up, Liam took a moment, testing the rope's strength, creating a secure harness, and establishing clear signals. Despite his eagerness, Sarah saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. You don't have to do this, she told him quietly. I want to, he replied with determined courage. Eleanor left these clues for people like us. I can do this. The descent began slowly. Sarah and Thomas carefully paid out the rope as Liam disappeared into the well. Emma kept her flashlight beam steady, providing visibility, while Zoe watched with an unusual stillness, as if listening to an unheard voice. "I'm on the ledge," Liam called up, his voice echoing. "It's wider than it looked, almost like a... Wait, there's something here." "What do you see?" Sarah shouted. "There's an opening in the stones, like a little chamber built into the well wall." Excitement tinged his voice. "I have to reach inside." Tense minutes passed as they listened to Liam's movements below. Sarah held her breath, imagining all the things that could go wrong. The rope fraying, the ledge crumbling, her son falling into the dark water. "I've got something!" Liam yelled, triumphant. "It's some kind of metal box." Retrieving Liam and his find proved easier than the descent. When he emerged, dirty but beaming with pride, he was clutching a metal ammunition box, its surface protected by a waterproof casing. Back inside the cabin, they carefully pried it open. The box contained an antique brass compass, its surface engraved with the now familiar leaf pattern, and a waterproof bundle of papers, more journal pages in Eleanor's own hand. "These are different from her personal diaries," Sarah observed, carefully examining the fragile pages. "They look like formal documents," Thomas read over her shoulder. "Topographical surveys, property descriptions, and look here, notarized statements about property lines." Emma spread the pages carefully across the table. There are references to fraudulent adjustments of the property boundaries by Blackwood. That would be Harrison's grandfather. Eleanor's husband was a land surveyor, Sarah recalled from earlier diary entries. He would have had access to official records. The compass caught Liam's eye. Unlike ordinary compasses, it had additional markings around the circumference, symbols that matched those on the carved stone. "It's a decoder," he realized, comparing the patterns. "The stone shows where to look, and the compass helps you read the directions." "There's more," Thomas said gravely, holding up one last document. It was a confession, signed by William Turner, a former county clerk, admitting he had falsified property records under the direction of James Blackwood. It was dated October 1956, 1 month before Eleanor vanished. "Proof of fraud," Sarah whispered. This is what she had been collecting. "But it's not enough," Thomas cautioned. "This confession alone won't overturn 70 years of property claims. There must be more substantial proof." "The final piece of her treasure," Emma concluded. "Which we still have to find," Sarah added, glancing at the eviction countdown on the calendar. "We have 23 days left." As they studied Eleanor's new materials, Zoe sat quietly in a corner, whispering to the air. When she rejoined them, her expression was solemn. "Eleanor says we need to hurry," she reported. "The bad man knows we're looking." "Harrison Blackwood?" Sarah asked. Zoe nodded. "She says to look where the trees make an X on her grandfather's border." Thomas raised his eyebrows at Sarah, who just shrugged. "We've learned not to dismiss Zoe's intuitions." Outside the cabin, unseen by the family, a small drone hovered briefly near the window before zipping away into the trees. The exploration of the well had not gone unnoticed. The Pine Haven Public Library occupied the old town hall, its marble columns and high ceilings lending an air of grandeur to the modest collection of books. In the basement archives, Emma and Sarah hunched over microfiche readers, methodically scanning decades of local newspapers. "This is it," Emma whispered excitedly, freezing on a headline from 1944. "Blackwood acquires watershed properties for expansion." Sarah leaned in to read. The article described James Blackwood buying up abandoned and delinquent properties throughout the valley for a planned logging operation. A quote from Blackwood claimed the acquisitions would revitalize the local economy while preserving the region's natural character. Look at the list of properties, Emma pointed. The Whitman tract is specifically mentioned, but Eleanor's journals said her grandfather's land was fully paid off. Sarah noted there had never been a tax delinquency. They kept scanning, finding scattered references to property disputes throughout the 1940s. Small landowners protested Blackwood's acquisitions, claiming their properties were neither abandoned nor delinquent, but the county always sided with Blackwood. Here's something. Sarah stopped on a small notice from 1947. County Surveyor James Matthews, Eleanor's husband, the man she would later leave, was announcing his retirement. He had worked directly for the county during the questionable property transfers. And look who replaced him. Emma indicated the last paragraph. William Turner, appointed as the new county surveyor on Blackwood's recommendation. The same William Turner who signed the confession we found in the well, Sarah realized. Eleanor's husband must have known about the fraud. Mrs. Carlton, the elderly librarian, approached with a box of dusty archives. "I found those county commission minutes you asked for," she said, setting them on the table. "Strange research for a school project." "It's more than that now," Emma admitted. "We're trying to save our home." Understanding dawned on the librarian's face. "The Whitman cabin. I thought it might be." She glanced around before lowering her voice. "You should check the old editions of The Observer. It offered a different perspective than the official Pine Haven Chronicle." The Observer proved to be a short-lived, independent paper critical of Blackwood's influence. Its final editions from early 1957 contained pointed questions about various real estate transactions, suggesting systematic fraud in property transfers across the county. The last issue was published 2 weeks after Eleanor disappeared, Emma observed. "Probably not a coincidence," Sarah murmured. They returned to the cabin laden with photocopies and notes. Thomas Reed was waiting on the porch, his expression grim. "Blackwood is pushing to accelerate the eviction," he reported. "He's claiming you're conducting unauthorized excavation that threatens the watershed." "He knows we're looking," Sarah realized. "But how?" "Drone," Liam announced, emerging from the trees with Zoe. "I found this caught in the branches near the well." He held up the twisted remains of a small camera drone. Thomas examined it. High-tech surveillance equipment. Not your typical hobbyist drone. Inside, they shared their discoveries. The library research revealed a pattern of questionable land acquisitions benefiting Blackwood timber, with Eleanor's husband potentially complicit before his conscience, or his wife, intervened. Eleanor must have found out what her husband had done, Thomas theorized, connecting the documents. She started collecting evidence after she left him, which made her dangerous to both her ex-husband and the Blackwoods. "There's more," Emma said, unrolling a large topographical map of the county from the 1930s, before Blackwood's acquisitions. The original property boundaries are completely different from current records. The Whitman land originally included most of what is now the northern Blackwood estate, including the site of their new development. Thomas whistled softly. "If we can prove the original boundaries and the fraudulent transfers, we could challenge not just our eviction, but the Blackwoods' entire claim on the northern properties." "But we need the original deeds and surveys," Sarah concluded. "These newspaper reports support our theory," Thomas warned, "but they won't hold up in court against 70 years of recorded ownership." Then, a small voice from someone who had been drawing quietly at the kitchen table suddenly spoke. "The boundary marker is where she put the important papers." "What boundary marker, sweetie?" Sarah asked. The one where the trees make an X, Zoe replied, as if it were obvious. Eleanor says her grandfather put special stones to mark his land. The papermen came and moved them, but he knew the real spots. Liam snapped his fingers. The compass. It's not just for direction. It's for finding the original property markers. Thomas looked skeptical, but intrigued. Old property surveys used to use natural landmarks and compass bearings. If Alexander Whitman marked his boundaries clearly enough, Sarah concluded, we might be able to find both the original markers and Eleanor's hidden proof. They spent the rest of the day plotting potential boundary points based on the 1930s survey map and Eleanor's diaries. Using the antique compass and the symbols from the stone as their guides, they identified 3 possible locations where the original boundary markers might have been. We'll start searching tomorrow, Sarah decided. As dusk settled over the cabin, Thomas prepared to leave. Be careful, he warned. Blackwood knows you're on to something. That drone wasn't just casual surveillance. After he left, Sarah watched her children planning the next day's exploration. Maps spread across the floor. The threat of eviction had transformed them. Emma was channeling her intellect into research. Liam's imagination was focused on practical problem solving, and Zoe's connection to Eleanor was accepted without question. They were fighting for their home with every skill they possessed. Sarah just hoped it would be enough. Rain hammered against the cabin windows, turning the clearing into a muddy bog. 3 days of relentless downpour had halted their search for the boundary markers and confined the family indoors. The tension mounted as the eviction deadline loomed. 19 days, Sarah murmured, looking at a family photo that had fallen from her wallet. The last one taken before her ex-husband had left. The glass was cracked now, splitting the image in 2. A fitting metaphor. Any word from Thomas? Emma asked, walking into the main room with a stack of Eleanor's journals. The court denied his motion to delay the eviction, Sarah said, tucking the broken photo away. He's going to appeal, but we're running out of time. And we can't search in this weather, Emma stated, her voice flat. The disappointment in her daughter's voice pricked at Sarah, stirring a wave of guilt and insecurity. I'm sorry I dragged you kids into this mess, she blurted out. Maybe we should be looking for another place to live instead of chasing Eleanor's ghosts. Emma stared at her, her expression hardening. You want to give up? I want what's best for you. A stable home, not a court battle we'll probably lose. This is our home, Emma insisted, her voice rising. We've poured everything into it. You can't just quit when things get hard. I'm trying to be realistic. No, you're being a coward. Emma's words struck like a slap. Just like Dad always said. You didn't fight for that either. Sarah recoiled. That was different. Was it? Because it feels exactly the same. Things get tough, and you look for a way out. Emma gathered the journals. Maybe Eleanor picked the wrong family for her treasure. She stormed up to the loft, leaving Sarah stunned by her daughter's outburst. The worst part was the kernel of truth in Emma's accusation. When her marriage had crumbled, Sarah had accepted defeat without a fight, too exhausted by years of emotional neglect to battle for anything beyond child support. Liam and Zoe had witnessed the argument from the kitchen doorway. Zoe retreated to her corner by the window, whispering to her invisible friend. Liam approached Sarah cautiously. We can't give up, Mom, he said, his young face serious. Eleanor chose us. Oh, sweetie. She did, he insisted. Zoe talks to her, but I feel her too, like she's watching over us. Before Sarah could respond, the cabin door banged open. Emma stood there, drenched in rain and frantic. "Liam's gone," she cried. "I went to apologize and he's not in the loft. His raincoat is missing." "What?" Sarah ran to check the back door. It was ajar, Liam's muddy footprints leading into the forest. "Why would he do that?" "He heard us fighting," Zoe said quietly from her corner. "He told Eleanor he was going to find the boundary marker by himself." Panic seized Sarah. The woods were treacherous in this weather, creeks swollen, hillsides slick, visibility near zero. "Call Sheriff Miller," she ordered Emma, grabbing her own rain slicker. "Tell him we need help, then you stay here with Zoe." "I'm coming with you," Emma insisted, already pulling on her boots. "No way. I'm not risking both of you out there." "This is my fault too," Emma's voice cracked. "Please, Mom." Sarah recognized the determination in her daughter's eyes. The same fierce protectiveness that had emerged when Emma had become a de facto second mother after the divorce. "Fine. But Zoe stays locked inside. Call Thomas too." They followed Liam's rapidly disappearing tracks into the woods, calling his name. The heavy rain muffled their voices and limited visibility to a few yards. Direction became meaningless in the green maze. "He was heading toward the western border," Emma yelled over the rain, "where the old creek meets the ridgeline." "How do you know?" "He's been studying Eleanor's maps for days. It's where the trees make an X." They pushed on, fighting through undergrowth and sucking mud. An hour into their search, with daylight fading and hope dwindling, Sheriff Miller's voice echoed through a bullhorn, organizing volunteer searchers from town. "We need to split up," Emma suggested. "Cover more ground." "No!" Sarah grabbed her arm. "Mom, we have to. The light is almost gone. Liam could be hurt." The fear in Emma's voice mirrored Sarah's own. She made a decision. "Take this." She handed Emma a flashlight and an emergency whistle. "You stay on the ridgeline trail. I'll follow the creek bed. 3 blasts if you find him." They separated, each fighting her own path through the storm. Sarah slogged along the swollen creek, shouting Liam's name until her voice was raw. Her mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Liam, injured, lost, or worse. Just as the darkness threatened to consume her, a distant whistle pierced the storm. 3 sharp blasts. Sarah ran toward the sound, slipping and falling repeatedly in her desperate scramble. She found Emma and Sheriff Miller beside a massive oak, one that had been struck by lightning years ago. Its splintered trunk formed a perfect X with a neighboring pine that had grown through the cleft. And there, huddled in a hollow at its base, was Liam. Wet, muddy, but gloriously unharmed. "Mom!" he cried, launching himself into her arms. "I found it! I found Eleanor's mark!" In his hand he held a carved stone identical to the first clue. The storm had partially uprooted the lightning-scarred oak, revealing the stone nestled among the roots. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows as the family examined Liam's find. The carved stone, similar to the first, but with different markings, had been hidden beneath the struck oak. After Sheriff Miller had helped them home through the storm, Thomas Reed arrived to join the investigation. "The symbols definitely coordinate with the compass," Thomas confirmed, aligning Eleanor's antique compass with the stone's markings. "But they're pointing back toward the cabin." "That makes no sense," Emma frowned. "Why create clues that lead us in a circle?" Sarah studied the pattern. Not in a circle, but to a specific point. The cabin itself had to hold the final clue. A new focus energized their search. Using the compass and both carved stones, they triangulated the exact location. Eleanor's trail pointed to the cabin's stone hearth. "But we've searched the fireplace completely," Sarah said, running her hands over the fitted stones. There's nothing hidden there. Zoe, who had been unusually quiet since Liam's adventure, suddenly spoke up. Not in the hearth. Under it. All eyes turned to the 8-year-old girl, who knelt by the fireplace and pressed her small palm against a specific stone, one adorned with a nearly invisible leaf etching. Eleanor says to push here, then pull the iron ring. Thomas raised a skeptical eyebrow, but Sarah had learned to trust her daughter's uncanny insights. She knelt beside Zoe, located the carved stone, and pressed firmly. A soft click rewarded her effort. The iron ring, she prompted. Zoe pointed to an ornamental ring set into another stone, which they had assumed was merely decorative. Sarah gripped it, gave a tentative tug, and gasped as a section of the hearthstone floor shifted, revealing a small compartment beneath. A hidden door, Liam exclaimed. Inside the compartment lay a heavy iron key and a folded piece of parchment. The note, in Eleanor's now familiar script, read, "For those who seek the truth with pure hearts, the final threshold lies beneath the heart of the home." Under the cabin? Emma questioned. Like a cellar. This cabin doesn't have a cellar, Thomas said. The foundation is solid rock. Maybe not the whole cabin, Sarah mused. Just under the hearth, the heart of the home. A careful inspection revealed a seam in the floorboards along the edge of the stone hearth. When pried, a trapdoor swung open, exposing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I'll go first, Sarah insisted, grabbing a flashlight. Thomas, right behind me. Kids, you stay up here until we know it's safe. The stairs creaked but held firm as Sarah descended into the cool dark. The beam of her flashlight revealed a small room, perhaps 12 feet square, with an earthen floor and stone walls. Contrary to the musty smell she'd expected, the air was surprisingly fresh. Some ventilation system had kept the space livable. Eleanor built a hidden vault, Thomas whispered, joining her. Brilliant. The room contained a simple wooden table and chair, a wall of built-in shelves, and an antique trunk. Every surface was covered with carefully preserved documents, maps, photographs, and ledgers. It's all here, Sarah breathed, scanning the nearest shelf. Everything Eleanor collected, Thomas said, picking up a bound volume from the table. These are the original survey maps from the 1890s, when Alexander Whitman first settled this property. He picked up another document. And here are the original deeds, with precise boundary descriptions that match those first maps. Mom, can we come down now? Liam called from above. Yes, but be careful on the stairs. The children's excited whispers filled the small space as they explored Eleanor's secret archive. Emma was immediately drawn to a collection of newspaper clippings and photographs. Liam examined an old theodolite with reverent awe. Zoe simply stood in the middle of the room, smiling as if sharing a private joke. She's happy we found it, the little girl announced. She's been waiting a long time. Sarah turned her attention to the trunk, which was secured with a padlock. The iron key from the hearth compartment fit perfectly. Inside, she found the most damning proof of all: ledgers documenting James Blackwood's systematic fraud, complete with dates, property descriptions, and amounts paid to county officials to falsify records. Most shocking was a leather-bound journal with James Matthews embossed on the cover, Eleanor's husband's personal record of his role in the scheme, followed by his crisis of conscience. This is incredible, Thomas murmured, carefully handling the journal Sarah handed him. This proves the Blackwood fortune was built on fraudulently obtained land. The current property lines are all based on falsified records, not just for the cabin, Emma realized. studying a large map spread on the table. According to these original documents, nearly half of what is now Blackwood property legally belongs to other families. That includes the entire North Ridge where they're planning the new development. No wonder Harrison is so determined to get us out. If this evidence became public, Sarah said, it would trigger the biggest land dispute in the county's history, and potentially hundreds of millions in liability for the Blackwood Corporation, Thomas finished. Among the papers, Sarah found a sealed envelope, addressed simply, "To whom it may concern." Inside was Eleanor's last will and testament, dated 1 week before her disappearance in 1957. "I, Eleanor Whitman," Sarah read aloud, "being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my property and all improvements thereon to those who have need of it, as I once did. Souls seeking refuge and justice may they find both within these walls." "She left the cabin to whoever found her treasure," Emma whispered. "To us." Thomas carefully gathered the most critical documents. "We need to get these somewhere safe, immediately. Once Blackwood gets wind of what you've found, he'll stop at nothing to bury this evidence again." "Just like he or his father did to Eleanor," Sarah concluded grimly. The Pinehaven County Administration building buzzed with unusual activity as Sarah and Thomas made their way to the special hearing. News of Eleanor's documents had swept through town, despite their efforts to be discreet. Community members lined the halls, their expressions a mix of curiosity and outright support. "Remember," Thomas whispered as they neared the meeting room, "today we're just presenting preliminary findings. This isn't a trial, just a hearing to postpone your eviction based on new evidence. But Blackwood will be there with his lawyers." "Yes," Thomas said, patting his briefcase, "and we have enough to stop the eviction process cold. The rest will take time." The room was packed. At one table sat Harrison Blackwood, with 2 men in suits Sarah assumed were corporate attorneys. Sheriff Miller stood at the back, his arms crossed. The 3 county commissioners occupied the raised dais, with Judge Anderson present as a special advisor. Commissioner Taylor, a woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, called the meeting to order. "This emergency session will address new evidence concerning the ownership of the former Whitman land, currently subject to eviction proceedings against Sarah Matthews and her family." Thomas presented their case methodically, introducing key documents from Eleanor's collection, while projecting maps and photographs onto a screen for all to see. These records prove conclusively that the 1944 tax sale transferring the Whitman property to Blackwood Timber was based on falsified assessments, he explained, holding up sworn affidavits and account ledgers. Alexander Whitman's taxes were paid in full. The property was never eligible for a tax sale. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Blackwood's lawyers whispered urgently to their client, whose face remained impassive except for a muscle twitching along his jaw. "Furthermore," Thomas continued, "we have documented proof of systematic fraud orchestrated by James Blackwood, including signed confessions from county officials who participated in the scheme." Commissioner Daniels, a man in his 60s, leaned forward. "These are serious allegations against a family that has been prominent in this county for generations, Mr. Reed." "They are serious, and they are thoroughly documented," Thomas replied, nodding to Sarah, who distributed folders to each commissioner. "This is absurd," Blackwood finally spoke, his voice controlled but tight. "These supposed documents could easily be forgeries. The statute of limitations on such claims ran out decades ago." "Fraud has no statute of limitations in this state," Thomas countered, "especially when concealed through ongoing acts of deception. as evidenced by the deliberate burial of Eleanor Whitman's archive, which conveniently surfaced just as her heir faced eviction. Quite a coincidence, Blackwood's lawyer interjected. Sarah stood. Eleanor created a treasure hunt specifically to preserve this evidence until the right person could find it. She knew what happened to this land wasn't just unfair, it was criminal. Ms. Matthews, Commissioner Taylor cautioned, those are allegations that would require a court of law to prove. I understand, but surely these findings warrant a stay on our eviction until ownership can be properly determined. As the commissioners conferred in low tones, Sheriff Miller approached the dais and spoke briefly with Commissioner Taylor, who nodded gravely. We will take a 15-minute recess, she announced. Mr. Blackwood, please remain available. In the hallway, Mabel was waiting with Emma, Liam, and Zoe. How is it going? She asked anxiously. It's hard to tell, Sarah admitted. But at least they're listening. Mabel squeezed her hand. Half the town is talking about Eleanor's evidence. People are remembering old family stories about land that was taken from them. Thomas stepped away to make a call while Sarah updated the children. Across the hall, she noticed Harrison Blackwood watching them, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he approached. He began without preamble. Ms. Matthews, may I have a word in private? Anything you have to say can be said in front of my family, Sarah replied coolly. Blackwood assessed the united front, then gave a curt nod. Very well. I am prepared to offer you a generous settlement. Full title to the cabin and the 5 surrounding acres, plus $250,000 for your trouble. In exchange for what? The documents, all of them, and your silence. Sarah felt Emma stiffen beside her. These documents aren't just about us, Sarah answered. They affect dozens of families whose land was stolen. An alleged theft from 70 years ago, Blackwood shot back. Opening this can of worms will only create chaos and uncertain legal battles that could drag on for years. Years your children could spend growing up in a secure home, with their education funded. Or we could spend those years in our current home, the one Eleanor specifically left for people like us. Blackwood's composure flickered. Be reasonable. You're one small family against Blackwood Timber. This corporation employs half this town. Do you really want to be responsible for the economic fallout when operations are jeopardized by property disputes? It was a threat disguised as concern. Before Sarah could respond, Mabel stepped forward. I remember when your father used those same tactics on my neighbors, Harrison, she said quietly. When the Mueller farm was suddenly reassessed after they refused to sell. Or when the Jacobson homestead mysteriously burned down after old man Carl disputed a boundary line. Blackwood's face hardened. Be careful, Mabel. Unfounded accusations can be slanderous. Not when they're documented in Eleanor's records, Thomas interrupted, rejoining the group, including your father's handwritten instructions about the Jacobson property. As Blackwood retreated to confer with his lawyers, Thomas leaned close to Sarah. The commissioners are calling more witnesses. Mabel and several town elders have asked to speak about land transfers they personally witnessed. Sarah watched as community members filed back into the room, many pausing to offer her words of encouragement. What had begun as a simple defense against an eviction was evolving into a public reckoning, decades in the making. Mom, Emma whispered, are we really going up against the entire Blackwood Empire? Sarah squared her shoulders. Eleanor waited 70 years for justice. I think we can hold on for a few more hours. 3 weeks after the contentious hearing, Sarah stood at the cabin window, watching snow blanket the clearing. The eviction had been officially stayed, pending a full investigation into the property claims. Eleanor's documents were now secured in the county vault, with notarized copies at Thomas Reed's firm. Blackwood had withdrawn from public life, his corporate lawyers working overtime to contain the damage. The county's property records were under review, with dozens of families now coming forward with stories similar to Eleanor's. "Mom," Emma called from the kitchen table, where she was helping Zoe with her homework. "Thomas is here." The young lawyer stamped the snow from his boots on the porch before stepping inside. His expression was a tense mixture of excitement and apprehension. "The DNA results came in," he announced, wasting no time. Sarah had almost forgotten about that particular thread of the investigation. While organizing Eleanor's documents, they had discovered a sealed envelope containing a lock of hair and a baby's footprints, labeled simply, "My Child, April 1953. Eleanor's journals had never mentioned a pregnancy or a child, raising questions they hoped the DNA test might answer. "Is it a match to someone in Pinehaven?" Sarah asked, taking the folder he offered. Thomas glanced at the children. "Is there somewhere we can discuss this in private?" Sarah nodded. "Emma, keep an eye on things. We'll be on the porch." Despite the cold, the covered porch offered privacy. Sarah opened the folder, her eyes scanning the technical report, before landing on the summary page. "Mabel?" she whispered, the name a breath of disbelief. "Mabel Porter is Eleanor's daughter?" Thomas nodded grimly. "A 99.7% probability of a maternal match. And I confirmed Porter was her maiden name, not her married name as everyone assumed." "But how? Eleanor never mentioned a child in her diaries." "There's a sealed section of her personal journal from 1952 to 1953 that we hadn't opened," Thomas explained. "With this development, I thought you should see it." He handed her a small, leather-bound volume. Back inside, Sarah retreated to her room to read the newly opened journal, while Thomas entertained the children with updates on the investigation. The entries revealed a heartbreaking story. Eleanor had discovered she was pregnant shortly after leaving her husband. Unmarried, isolated, and vulnerable, she made the agonizing decision to give her newborn daughter to a childless couple in Pinehaven, the Porters, who owned the general store. May 15th, 1953. Today, I held my daughter for the last time. Martha Porter has promised to love her as her own. I believe her. Robert Porter is a good man who will give her the stability I cannot. They will name her Mabel, after Martha's mother. I will watch my child grow up from a distance, a stranger to her. This sacrifice breaks my heart, but it ensures her safety. James would use her against me if he knew, and the Blackwoods would see her as leverage. It is better that she grows up loved and safe, never knowing the burden of her mother's battles. Subsequent entries chronicled Eleanor's secret vigil over her daughter's life, watching school plays from the back row, sending anonymous birthday gifts, ensuring from afar that Mabel never went without. December 24th, 1956. I saw Mabel in the Christmas pageant. At 8 years old, she is already so bright and confident. Martha has done a fine job with her. Sometimes I dream of telling her the truth, but my enemies are watching too closely now. The evidence I have gathered puts anyone connected to me at risk. Better she never know than become a target. The final entry, dated just days before Eleanor's disappearance, read, "My preparations are complete. The evidence is secured where only the worthy will find it. I have arranged for the cabin and land to eventually pass to those who need them, just as I did. All that remains is to vanish before Blackwood's men make good on their threats. I leave behind two treasures, the truth hidden in stone and shadow, and my daughter hidden in plain sight. Perhaps one day, when justice is done, Mabel will learn who her mother was. Until then, I carry her in my heart as I travel west under my new name. She didn't die, Sarah whispered to herself. She escaped. When she emerged from the bedroom, Thomas was showing Liam how property surveys were done using the old theodolite from Eleanor's secret room. We need to tell Mabel, Sarah said quietly. Are you sure that's wise? She's in her 70s. This could be a significant shock. She deserves to know her mother didn't abandon her. She protected her. Sarah grabbed her coat. And she might have more information that could help our case. In Mabel's apartment above the store, Sarah gently presented the journal and the DNA results. The old woman sat in silence for long minutes, her aged fingers tracing Eleanor's handwriting. I always wondered, Mabel finally said, her voice thick with emotion. There were little things, gifts that would mysteriously appear. A woman who watched me from a distance at school events. Mother Martha would never speak of it, but sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with such sorrow. You never suspected Eleanor specifically? I was a child when she disappeared. Later, I just heard the stories. Mabel wiped away a tear. To think she was watching over me this whole time. That last entry, she didn't die. She made a new life and went west. Her mind, sharp as ever, began working. There might be records, a trail we could follow. Sarah hesitated before asking, did you ever feel a presence at the cabin? As if Eleanor was still there somehow? Mabel gave a wry, mysterious smile. I never spent much time there. Martha forbade it, said it was dangerous. Now I understand why. She paused, thinking. But yes, I always felt a connection to that place, a pull. When you all arrived, it felt right. Zoe believes she speaks with Eleanor, Sarah admitted. She knows things she couldn't possibly know. Children often sense what adults cannot, Mabel replied simply. Whether it's Eleanor's spirit or just her legacy speaking through those walls, the connection is real. She squeezed Sarah's hand, her eyes shining. And now we know why she chose your family to find her treasure. Who better to protect a mother's legacy than another mother fighting for her children's future? When they returned to the cabin, Zoe was waiting on the porch, bundled against the cold. Did you tell her? She asked immediately. Tell her what, honey? Sarah replied. That she's Eleanor's daughter. Zoe looked from Sarah to Mabel. Eleanor told me a long time ago, but she said it was a secret, until you found the special papers. Sarah and Mabel exchanged a look of stunned silence. Yes, Sarah finally answered, a smile spreading across her face. We told her. The spring sun warmed the courthouse steps as Sarah and Thomas emerged from the final hearing. Behind them, the historic building buzzed with activity as reporters and townspeople gathered to hear the outcome of what locals now called the Whitman case. I still can't believe it, Sarah said, squinting in the bright light. After everything, we actually won. Eleanor won, Thomas corrected, his professional demeanor giving way to a boyish grin. We just finished what she started 70 years ago. The formal county investigation had confirmed the authenticity of Eleanor's documents. prompting the state attorney general to launch a wider probe into Blackwood's land acquisitions. Faced with mounting evidence and potential criminal charges, Harrison Blackwood had finally agreed to a settlement. "Mom!" Emma called, racing up the steps with Liam and Zoe at her heels. Mabel followed more slowly, leaning on her cane. "What happened? Did they take the deal?" Sarah nodded, pulling her children into a hug. "It's official. The original Whitman property lines are restored, with the cabin and the surrounding 50 acres legally transferred into a trust. The Eleanor Whitman Memorial Trust," Thomas added, "with Mabel as the primary beneficiary and trustee." Mabel's eyes twinkled. "And as trustee, my first official act was to grant lifetime tenancy rights to the Matthews family, with the option to purchase for a nominal fee." "We get to stay?" Liam asked, bouncing on his toes. "We get to stay," Sarah confirmed, ruffling his hair. "The cabin is officially our home." The settlement went far beyond their family. The Blackwood Corporation was forced to establish a substantial restitution fund for other affected families whose land had been fraudulently acquired. The Northern Development Project was permanently halted, with those acres designated a nature preserve in Eleanor's name. Harrison Blackwood himself stepped down as CEO, facing his own criminal charges despite his lawyer's best efforts. The corporation's future remained uncertain, but its era of unchecked power in Pinehaven was over. "What about the other families?" Emma asked as they walked toward Mabel's store, where a community celebration was waiting. "Will they get their land back too?" "Some will, yes," Thomas explained. "Others will receive financial compensation. Each case will be reviewed individually." "The important thing," Mabel added, "is that the truth is finally out. My mother's work was not in vain." The investigation had revealed more about Eleanor's disappearance. Records unearthed in California confirmed she had indeed fled west, establishing a new identity as Ellen White. She lived a quiet life as a librarian in a small coastal town until her death in 1998, never revealing her true identity, but keeping a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about Pinehaven and the Blackwood Corporation. "I wish I could have known her," Mabel said softly. "In a way you did," Sarah replied gently. "She was watching over you your whole life." Zoe skipped ahead, then turned to walk backward, facing them. "Eleanor says she's proud of all of us." After months of Zoe's uncanny insights, the family had stopped questioning her connection to Eleanor's spirit, be it imagined or real. Some things, Sarah had learned, defied rational explanation. The party at Mabel's store lasted late into the evening. Nearly the entire town showed up, many sharing their own family stories of Blackwood's dubious dealings. What had started as one family's fight for their home had become a community's reckoning with its past. As twilight settled over Pinehaven, Sarah found a quiet moment with Thomas on the store's back porch. "I never properly thanked you," she said. "You took our case when no one else would." "It started as professional curiosity," he admitted. "Then it became something more. Justice for Eleanor." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Your determination. I admired it then, and I still do." A moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Later, Sarah walked with her children and Mabel back to the cabin. The path through the woods, once unfamiliar and threatening, now felt like the most natural place in the world. "What happens now?" Emma asked, falling into step beside her mother. "Practical things," Sarah answered. "I'll keep working at Mabel's store. You'll all finish the school year here. We'll keep fixing up the cabin. I mean with us, after everything we've been through. Sarah considered the question, understanding its deeper meaning. For months, they had been bound together by crisis. The threat of eviction, the mystery of Eleanor, the legal battle. With all of that resolved, what would define them now? We build the life we want, she said finally. Not just surviving, but thriving. Back at the cabin, a new deed waited on the kitchen table, officially recording their legal right to the home they had fought for. Beside it lay the property survey, its lines redrawn to the original Whitman boundaries. Eleanor's vision, at long last, was made real. As the children settled into bed, Sarah sat on the porch steps, watching fireflies rise in the clearing. The cabin behind her, solid and enduring, was more than just a shelter. It was proof that sometimes justice only sleeps, it doesn't die. That carefully kept secrets can, eventually, bring the truth to light. And that the resolve of one woman can echo through the decades, touching lives that hadn't even begun when she first took her stand. From within, Zoe's voice echoed down from the attic. Good night, Eleanor. Thank you for finding us. Sarah smiled, whispering her own gratitude into the twilight. Some might call it superstition, but she preferred to see it as gratitude. To Eleanor, to fate, to whatever constellation of happenstance had guided a desperate, homeless family to the very sanctuary they so desperately needed. The morning would bring new challenges, but tonight, they were home. Finally, and unequivocally, home. A year later, the cabin was transformed. A fresh coat of paint brightened the exterior. New glass gleamed in the window panes, and a wooden swing now hung from the sturdy bough of a nearby oak tree. The garden, once a tangled wilderness, now flourished with vegetables, herbs, and Eleanor's heirloom flowers, cultivated from the preserved seeds they had found in her sea.